Story and the intro, and thank you so much for the introduction, Selena. Want to start by expressing my deepest gratitude to the organizers, everybody that's working to make this happen, as well as the leaders, especially Kim Solomon, for making this happen, and for every one of you to come together to work to work toward peace. In my message, I guess a lot of you are students, and a lot of times I don't know if they still write that way, but you do. You write everything and then you go to the conclusion. I'll just start with the conclusion. In order to get peace, there has to be justice. In order for there to be justice, the truth must come to light. And that is the formula that I follow. Truth leads to justice. Justice leads to peace. And there's no justice, there's no peace without justice. And as has been said multiple times in this conference, peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the absence of justice. And many of the speakers have spoken about it. Anytime there is an injustice and it continues and there's no accountability, there's no justice, as we say in the US when we're protesting, no justice, no peace, in the end, those grievances will come to light and they will come to the fore, and there will be eruption. For any grievances that are not addressed, they will always cause more conflict. And people will resort to violence because they don't have a voice. So how did I get here? How did I even end up speaking at this amazing conference that we're at? I was born in Rwanda, and growing up as a kid, I never knew that I would actually ever live in another country. I didn't even know there were other countries. When I was a kid, I thought everybody was Rwandan. Michael Jackson was Rwandan. Michael Jordan was Rwandan. Muhammad Ali was Rwandan. Bob Marley was Rwandan. And I knew they were white people. And the white people came from a place in Rwanda called Europe. And they spoke Kinyarwanda with a heavy accent. And that was my understanding of the world. Fast forward, when I was 10 years old, 1990, a war erupts. So I didn't know there were other countries. I also did not know that Rwanda had ethnic groups. Everybody's black. Everybody speaks the same language. Everybody eats the same food, same traditions. I mean, there are a variety of religions, but that's about it. You can't just look at a person and know what ethnicity they belong to. So I remember one day they asked in school what ethnic groups we belong to. And so some kids, there are three in Rwanda. There are Hutus, Twas, and Tutsis. So some kids knew they were Hutus, others knew they were Tutsis. I don't remember any Twas. Many kids did not know what they were, and I got up and I was like, oh, I'm Christian. And they laughed. So when I went home, I asked my parents, I was like, is there something wrong with being Christian? And they asked me the story. I tell them the story, and my sister goes, oh, Claude, you're so stupid. You should have told him you're Catholic. So that's how oblivious we were to ethnicity. But this war, the start of this war, was actually, the war was waged along ethnic lines. There was a rebel group of exiled Rwandans. Do you know what exiled means? I believe there are a number of people here who may be exiled also, just based on some of the introductions that I've heard. So there were exiled Rwandans from 30 years before who went to Uganda. They joined the military in Uganda. They formed a rebel group, and they invaded Rwanda from northern Rwanda. This group was led by Rwanda's president today, Paul Kagame. This group was mostly ethnic Tutsis. The government in Rwanda was mostly ethnic Hutus, and the Hutus are the majority. They're 85% of the population. So when the war started, a lot of us did not know what ethnic groups we belonged to. We didn't even know what ethnicity meant, again, because you can't really distinguish. It's hard to distinguish one Rwandan from another. But then I remember the day that I had never even seen weapons. Before that war started, I'd never seen weapons. So I remember that day seeing a bunch of tanks and people dressed in military fatigues and all of that, and I thought somebody was shooting a movie in Rwanda. But I was really restless, and then they explained to us, oh, there's a rebel group that invaded Rwanda, and so this war goes on for 4 years. For those 4 years, these rebels committed horrific atrocities. You watched the video from when Nimat was speaking, the previous speaker. Those type of atrocities, gathering people in large crowds like this and just surrounding them and throwing grenades into the crowds and sometimes killing them with hand weapons. Sexual violence, like horrible sexual violence toward women. And people started displacing. They left their villages in northern Rwanda. Rwanda is a very small country. It's one of the most densely populated countries, but it's a very small country. It was about 8 million people at the time. Over 1 million people fled their homes. They basically became homeless in their own country. So imagine whatever country you come from, over 10% of the population moving to one city in the space of 3 years. If you're from China, just imagine over 100 million people moving, or from India, over 100 million people moving to one city in the country in the space of 3 years. For those who live in Western countries, and I heard a lot of people, I've heard there are people who are from Canada, there are people who are from Australia and a number of other places. And I don't know, maybe even in non-Western countries this happened, but do you remember what it was like to get toilet paper when COVID hit? That's what it was like to get anything. Resources were constrained. So a lot of things started happening with that war. One, it was because it was waged along ethnic lines, there was polarization. That war introduced polarization, and old grievances came to the fore. The second thing was, as I talked about the atrocities, I talked about the displacement. There were a lot of political assassinations. There were terror attacks. When you go to markets or bus stations, places, places that are very crowded, those places were getting bombed. And there were also weapons everywhere, to the extent that regular crime that normally would be committed with people just breaking into a house or something, now they had grenades, they had guns, and so if you're getting robbed, it's an armed robbery. And so the city of Kigali, which is where I grew up, became very, very insecure. And again, as I said, I'm describing the whole scene before the genocide. While as that all was happening, people were getting, life was hard. I was born and I grew up in a family that was fairly privileged for an African family. Both my parents worked, but a lot of people around did not have jobs, or they did like day jobs, small jobs, sold things on the streets. They had no money. And by the time we got to 4 years into this war, life was so hard that at the time, it would have been cheaper for me as a young teen to buy a grenade than it would have been for me to buy a loaf of bread or a bottle of soda. That's how hard life was. And all of those were exacerbating factors that basically made people, it was so easy to incite people to kill. And then you add the violence that the rebels were committing, and now you have extremist Hutus spreading propaganda, basically attributing that to all of the Tutsis, which, of course, if there is a group that's committing atrocities and they belong to an ethnicity or a country or something, they don't represent everybody. You heard from the ambassador yesterday, he kept emphasizing our issue is not with Judaism or with the Jews, our issue is with Zionism. So there was a distinction that was not made. And so by 1994, the event that started the genocide, it was another assassination. This time the assassination was of Rwanda's Hutu president, along with a Burundian president, who were shot in a plane landing in Rwanda. After the shooting of the plane, life completely and totally changed. Remember, I said I never thought I'd live in another country. I also never thought that I would leave Kigali, that city that I grew up in, because I couldn't think of other places that I would want to live in Rwanda. Starting that night, I wished I could get out of that place. That night, we started hearing bombs dropping. There were shells, and there was an explosion from one side, and it would whistle over our heads and drop on the other end. And it was ongoing, and it was so constant that we started, eventually, in the beginning, I was really scared. I was scared, my stomach was bubbling, I was shaking, and I was pacing, running one way, and I felt like I needed to use the bathroom and come back the other way. And then eventually, we all became numb. After becoming numb is when we started, now with all of this destruction and the crumbling things and people screaming for help and all of that, we could time from when the explosion exploded on one side and would drop to the other side. We started basically playing, as kids, we started playing a game of guess when it's gonna drop. So at our house, prior to the genocide, there was actually, the Rwandan government and the rebels had started peace talks. And during that time, my father got an invitation, not an invitation, a scholarship to go study in the US. And he at first turned it down. And then my mother said, I think it's gonna be okay, by the time you're done, the peace deal will be in place and there will be no war and everything will be fine. So my father, he went to the US in 1992. And in June of 94 is when he was supposed to come back. The genocide started in April of 94, so we got disconnected. My father didn't know where we were. So imagine being separated from your parents or siblings or anybody that, your loved ones for months that felt like forever and not knowing where that person, where that person is. That's where he was. Us, on the other side, we were trying to escape all these atrocities. There was a day when a militiaman, so another thing that happened, it wasn't just the bombings, there were these groups now, militia groups of extremist Hutus that started going house to house, hunting down Tutsis and killing them with machetes and hand weapons. And one time, there was a time when I heard my sister screaming. She was in the backyard running, and then she screamed, and there was a guy with a gun pointed at her, and he pulled the trigger, the gun jammed, and somehow he left her alone. After that, we went into hiding. We hid in, we had a little storage shed that was next to a doghouse at the back of our house. We went into that little shed, and we would hear people at night coming into the house, looking for us, looking to kill us. So my background, my mother is Tutsi, my father is Hutu. And there are many people like me from mixed background. Again, we didn't even know what ethnicity we belonged to. So at the time, they're hunting down Tutsis, and we're hiding in this storage shed. After multiple nights of hearing people inside of the house searching for us, looking to kill us, we ended up, some neighbors came, they found us in that little storage, and they smuggled us out of our house, bundled us up in blankets, and they took us to another neighbor's house. A lot of people who survived the Rwandan genocide, they were sheltered by their neighbors. Generally, they're Hutu neighbors, because for the most part, the search was, they were searching for Tutsis. So we stay in this place for weeks, and the bombings are getting worse. What we didn't know was that in areas also controlled by the rebel group was known as the RPF. Now it's the party in power in Rwanda. What we didn't know was that in areas where the RPF was even better organized in the way they were killing people, they would take people into camps, and they would select them, and they would take them away and bury them in mass graves, and sometimes burn their bodies. That part we didn't know. We just were seeing all these extremist Hutus killing people and bodies piling up on the side of the streets, not knowing what these extremist Tutsi rebels were doing. So here we are. Rwanda at the time, not only was there all of that noise from all that bombing and the gunshots and the flashes at night and all of that, it smelled really bad. The mixture of decomposing human flesh, the burning structures, the dust from all of these, the structures that were being destroyed, the smoke from things that were burning and all of that. Anytime you walked out, you felt like you were gonna puke. So as the days go by, the RPF continues to bomb its way across the city of Kigali, and then eventually one time, a shell hit the house. And we took cover. We started scrambling. Nobody knew where to go. And I remember at one point afterwards, we were all huddled up in this little room. And for a while, everybody was so shook. We didn't know what to do. And the strangest part was one of the people who was sheltering in this house, a woman, when the bomb hit or the shell hit, she was in the shower and she just ran into and she sat right there with us, no clothes on, and nobody noticed until hours later. That's how shook we were. Eventually, the family that was sheltering us decided, it's getting too dangerous. We're gonna help you. We're gonna get this pickup truck, this driver, so he can rescue you out of Kigali. And you can we decided to go to northwest Rwanda, near Congo, in the village where my father's from. So we start traveling, and we kept getting stopped at all of these checkpoints, and they threatened to kill us. I mean, they would point to the woods and say, they would take us all out of the truck and say, you're joining those, and there were piles of dead bodies in those woods. It was scary, but every time somebody would come and say something, and they would leave us alone, and we keep going. And then we got to one checkpoint, and they didn't take everybody out. They didn't say, pull over and stay right there. They actually said, you know what, you and you. They pointed at me and my mother, pulled us out of the truck, separated us, put my mom on one side of the street, put me on the other side of the street, and a guy looked me in the eyes and he goes, say goodbye to life. And then they led us away from the street to this it was like a little bamboo forest. There was a carpentry shop. And while we were there, a group of people ran up. It was mostly women, children, and some elderly men. And they started yelling at this guy, saying, hey, leave them alone, don't kill them. Y'all spend your days killing people, leave them alone. And they had ordered the truck to leave. Usually once your transportation left, you were done. I was so scared in this place. I went back through those motions again, my stomach bubbling, shaking, and eventually going numb and accepting my fate in this place. One of the things that I felt the most, though, was loneliness. I felt so alone. I felt so lonely. And I was thinking, man, I really hope, I know that we're about to die here, but I hope the world ends up knowing what is happening to us in this, not only in this place, but to everybody that it's happened to. But I also felt like nobody cared. And the driver came back twice. Each time, he came back with somebody that I didn't recognize. Two men at different turns. The first one came, he started negotiating, told them, hey, let them go and all of that. And they were like, no. In fact, they ordered us, me and my mother, they say, go talk to those people that are yelling at us. Borrow some shovels and hoes and dig your grave because we have to bury you after we kill you. So as all that was happening, this man is negotiating. The driver left and came back with another person. And now these two men are pleading. The crowd, the small crowd of people is staying at a distance and yelling. And it was like mid-afternoon when we got to this place. It was pitch black when one of the men who was pleading said, you know what? This boy and his mother are not going to make it 5 miles from here. Let somebody else kill them. Somehow, they agreed to that. And so we left this place. We stopped at some family friends, and they said, no, you can't leave this house. You need to stay here, because if you leave, you continue traveling, you're going to get killed. So we stayed with this family for months. Then the bombing continued. The RPF is sweeping through the country. They're shooting everybody in their sight, destroying everything in front of them. And eventually it came to that town, this town of Gisenyi, and we crossed over into the Congo. When we started trying to cross into the Congo, it was middle of the night. It was like 2 a.m. And the distance was literally shorter than going from right here where I'm standing to the back of the room. It was that we were that close to the border. All we had to do was cross the street. We started trying to cross it was like maybe 3 a.m. We didn't get across until midday the next day. There were so many people, cars, motorcycles, bikes, belongings, babies crying. And, while with the bombings and the shootings, it was so brutal that some of the women would run with their babies on their backs, and sometimes the babies would get shot and they wouldn't know that the baby's gotten shot until they get to a point of stopping. Some of these are censored stories. You can't talk about these stories because the story of the Rwandan genocide has been crafted a certain way, but the Rwandan government now, because of course they won the war, and they have to tell it a certain way. Some of these stories, they don't want them told. We have told them in this book, Survivors Uncensored, which is also authored in, it's in both English and French for anybody that's interested. The book is called Survivors Uncensored, and for those of you who speak French, it's called Survivre par la parole in French. Now, so we cross into the Congo. We get into the Congo, we are completely homeless now, but I'm relieved. I'm like, you know what? The bombings and, the machetes and all of these people that are looking to kill, were at least out of their custody. Once we got into the Congo, we were met with disease, cholera. It was a terrible disease. I mean, it kills you with dehydration, and the bodies started piling up on the side of the streets again. And we slept wherever. I was with my mother and my two sisters. The only belongings we had was a cup, a spoon, a pot, and a plate. That's all we had. Whenever it rained at night, we would get rained on. It was really hot. And I don't know if you all know what volcano rock is like. The ground is like a volcanic rock. So we were basically laying on those rocks at night. Eventually, once we got into the Congo, my mother was able to reconnect with my father. She sent a fax to his school. And my father's told us the story since, and he said that basically somebody got the fax and they were like, yeah, we got a fax here, and we can't tell what language it's written in. Can you check and see if it's written in French? And when he saw it, it was my mom's handwriting, and he was so happy to see that fax. So he knew now that we were in Goma, Congo, and the conditions were really bad. I mean, there is a report on it that says this is the standard by which all humanitarian crises will be judged by. We were so crowded. There was no water. There was only a lake that divides Rwanda and Congo. That was the source of water. The water, it had dead bodies in from the genocide and the war. It had, people were bathing in it, animals were bathing in it, and that was the water that we would use to drink, cook, and bathe. And that's what was killing people. And my father there was an American aid worker that came and found us in this crowded, just a large crowd of people, and took us to Uganda. The plan was, when you get to Uganda, we'll get you a visa and you'll go see, you'll be with your dad in a week or two. We got there, the visa application was denied. The road to Uganda, so we had spent so much time without eating. When we stopped, after crossing the border into Uganda, we went to a restaurant and they bought us food and we just looked at the food for a while. And then eventually when we tried the food, we threw up. I mean, that restaurant, we really, really messed up that restaurant. And I remember taking a shower. We stayed in a hotel. The tub was shiny white. After I took a shower, that black volcanic rock, have you seen a black tub? Yeah, that tub was black. We were dirty. We were malnourished. Eventually, we get to, so the visa application is denied. So just to speed up through this part of my story is, we ended up in Kenya, and by the time we were in Kenya, my father had applied for asylum in the US, and when he got his asylum, we were able to join him in the US. The second part starts. So now we get to the US and I know nothing. I speak no English. The weather, we used to always, when it's 70 degrees, we were freezing in Central Africa, in those parts of Central Africa. Now, in Nashville, my father was in school in Nashville. In Nashville, the sun would shine and we'd go out and it's like December and the sun is shining. Oh my goodness, frostbite hits you from nowhere. The food was different. Couldn't make friends. It was a difficult adjustment. And I remember, initially, because I didn't speak any English, whenever somebody would say something to me, I would just smile and keep going. So if somebody came up to me and was like, hey, your shoelaces are untied, I would just smile and keep going. It's like, oh, you left your car lights on, just smile and keep going. I also remember when we first got there, as I was learning English, I looked up the word little in French, but the translation actually said few. So whenever people would ask me, hey, do you speak English? I meant to tell them a little, but I would say few with a lot of confidence, and they would just look at me and shake their heads, or a few words. So I started then eventually noticing certain things. When we got there, we lived in the ghetto. We lived in the poorest parts of Nashville. But I went to school in a place that's actually one of the wealthiest in Nashville, partly because they had an English as a second language program. It's still a public school. And I could see the difference. Whenever we're home, there's always all these police, and it seems like it's under occupation, And then when we go to school, there's none. And I didn't really think too much about it. I didn't realize that sometimes we were getting racially profiled. And eventually I started catching on to it because the experience at school and at home was completely different. Completely different. So things like racism, things that I never even knew, just like I didn't know there was another country, there were other countries. I didn't know there was racism until, I lived in a place that is diverse and has other races. But I was still going through high school, and once, things like police brutality were a norm in the neighborhood. But then when you tell people about it, they didn't believe you because we didn't have cell phone cameras. Now it's like when you show it, they're like, oh, this is a new thing. But no, it's not new. It's been happening, it just hadn't been filmed. So as I go through high school, I'm trying to get away from my story. I didn't want to talk about it. I was like, if I talk about it, am I even going to do it justice? And then with all of the censorship that there is even today in Rwanda, I was like, I'm just going to get myself in trouble with the Rwandan government at a minimum. So it wasn't until I got to college and I went there, my biggest thing, I just wanted to play soccer. I was on the soccer team and that's all I wanted to do. I got a job in this little library at school, and I would be chatting with friends while I'm in the library, and then eventually they would all go offline or go do other things while I'm still at work, and I started reading books. And so I read all of these books, and then I read the book of this man, Frederick Douglass. This guy was 7 years old when he was sold into slavery in America. A kid, 7. That's second, third, maybe fourth grade at most. And Frederick Douglass taught himself how to read and write. He also started resisting slavery or his slave masters' practices at 17. And he attempted to escape a number of times, but he got caught or somebody told on him and they stopped him and all of that. At the age of 21, he was able to escape, helped a bunch of other people escape. He used his writing skills to write himself freedom letters and got away. And when I read that book, I was not a very good reader. I was a very slow reader. I remember I started reading the book at work. I don't even know if I finished my work when it was time to get off. I couldn't wait to get to my room, my dorm room, keep reading the book. I read the book all night. The book was probably 50 pages. It's a really small book, but it took me that long. It took almost 2 days to read it. And I was like, what am I doing? I felt so useless, but I was really inspired. And I was like, this guy was a child when he was sold into slavery. And he had no resources. And here I am. I got his book from a library and I have all of these resources and opportunities. And he used his story, he used storytelling to resist one of the worst atrocity in human history, slavery. And so it inspired me to speak out. And at the time I was thinking, so what am I gonna do here? So I started sharing my story. And at the time, there were all of these atrocities and a whole genocide happening in Congo, including against a lot of the people that I fled Rwanda with in the refugee camps. So that war and genocide in the Congo was killing millions of people, and majority were children. So I started sharing my story to share what happens to children when atrocities are happening, when war is happening, when genocide is taking place, and stuff like that. And eventually, it led me to connecting with other people and co-found the organization, the African Great Lakes Action Network. To this day still, so our work focuses a lot on the Great Lakes region of Africa, which the largest territory there is the Congo, which is the second largest country on the African continent, the richest in natural resources in the whole world, with over $24 trillion worth of minerals. So many people have died in the last 30 years in the Congo. preventable death. Either they have been killed or they have died because they've been displaced and their conditions are so bad, like I was describing about ourselves and all of the things that we survived. In the world, it's the most underreported conflict. Most people do not know that this is even happening. Now with social media, I see a lot of free Palestine, free Sudan, free Congo, free Haiti. Those a lot of times go together. But this is a new thing. The world has ignored that conflict. And the excuse is, it's complicated. But it's not really that complicated. Usually, they say if you want to figure out a story of what's happening, follow the money. The genocide in Rwanda, what does it have to do with us here, sitting here? And the atrocities and the genocide in the Congo. So first of all, every single one of us is a consumer to minerals that come out of the Congo. The cell phones and a lot of electronics that we have are powered by coltan, which most of the reserves are found in the Congo. So the war in Rwanda, it was that led to the genocide that also led to the second genocide in Congo and to the atrocities that are happening today in Congo with the world's silence. It was to access the resources in the Congo. Today, there are a lot of companies that are exploiting the Congo. There was a site, I don't know if it's still active, conflictminerals.org, that had a list of companies, majority of them from Canada, mining companies, a lot of companies from Australia, a lot of companies from Belgium, a lot of American companies that were exploiting these resources. But what is worse for me as a citizen of the US is that we as taxpayers are actually funding the perpetrators. So today, one of the reasons why this conflict is not being, especially what's happening in Central Africa and the atrocities that happen in Central Africa, in Congo especially, and of course the repression and the human rights abuses that take place in Rwanda are not talked about, is because, and Uganda also, is because they are allies with the United States, the UK, the European Union. And so they get diplomatic cover. Whenever lawsuits come up, they get immunity. Whenever there's investigations, instead of going after the generals, they'll go after a sergeant, somebody that's completely unknown. It's always lip service. But for one, as consumers, we are taking part in this. For two, as citizens, for those who are from the US and European countries and Canada especially, we are also, our governments are funding these governments that are committing these atrocities, the Rwandan and Ugandan government. And those are things that we have rights to actually demand a change on. In the same way that we demand that the US stops funding genocide in Gaza. It's the exact same. It's our business, it's our money. And as I said in the beginning, you cannot get peace unless there is justice. Anytime you leave a grievance unanswered, without addressing it, unaddressed, it's gonna lead to violent conflict. So the best thing that we can do, it's always better to talk than war. The best thing that we can do is to raise awareness on these things that are happening. Every single one of you has a platform if you use social media. Back in the day, people used to drop leaflets. They would have to travel to get to those places and stuff like that. Right now, from where you're sitting, you can reach the world. So my challenge to you is raise awareness, speak up about the atrocities, especially what is happening today in the Congo, because it's horrible that so many, and I didn't talk about the sexual violence that takes place there. Again, the people who are doing it, the other thing that I want to make sure that we take away is a lot of times we'll talk about these atrocities and it would come across as, oh, it's a bunch of dumb, stupid Africans who cannot think. They just so tribal, they just start fighting. No, it's not like that. The people who are actually doing these things are paid. They have sponsors. Rwanda, Congo, a lot of these places, Uganda, they do not manufacture weapons. Their budgets they don't even have enough budget to sponsor wars, so they are sponsored. And so we have to also hold, it's a global issue. It's not like a local tribal issue. And so that's an important takeaway, because I think a lot of people tend to look at it that way. So one of the things that I've done in recent times, I worked with other survivors whose stories have been censored, and we co-authored this book, Survivors Uncensored. This was a collaboration. The name on it is not my name. It's the name of basically what platform we put together. And Divarwariraye, I'm sure a lot of you will struggle pronouncing that, means he or she who has traveled through the night or who has lived through the night can actually recount what's happened in that night. It's giving a voice to the people who actually lived through the experiences to speak about those experiences uncensored. The reason we decided to call it Uncensored Survivors is our experience. It's because there is a lot of effort to actually deny so many people a voice, and so many people are afraid, like I was, to speak out. And so we are not only fighting against censorship and a global system that is basically exploiting and enriching itself through the Congo resources, but also we have this individual, we have to do justice to ourselves. And justice starts with the truth. When you tell your story, normally you are imprisoned in the silence of your story. When you tell your story, you actually now are freeing yourself. You're practicing restorative justice. Yes, we want the criminals to face charges for what they've done, those who have done all of these killings that are still roaming around. We also want to restore ourselves. By telling our stories, it's therapy. For you who hear the story, you are witnesses to our survival. For any one of you that gets the book, when you get it and you read the stories, you become a witness. When you become a witness, you have a responsibility, and your responsibility is to share these experiences. Make sure the world know. The world must know. My wish in that one place when they ordered us to dig our grave was that the world knows. Then my mission has also been to make sure not only do they know about my story, but the story of other people. So, just know this one thing. Do y'all remember about the people who came and started yelling at the militias who were about to kill us? I don't know those people. I would have never recognized them if, today, if I ran into them, or if I ran into them the next day, I would not even recognize them. But they came and spoke. Their voices slowed them down, and our lives were spared. There's obviously a bunch of other people along the way, and a lot of different things that happened in such a timely manner that if it didn't happen the way it happened, my story would be completely different, and I may not be here speaking to you today and speaking with you today. This is not a movie. This is a real thing. This is something that happens to people. It's happened to myself, Nimat, the previous speaker, and some of the other speakers that you're going to hear from, people that you can shake hands with, people you can actually see and tell that they're still alive. And yet, there are still people who will try to deny that we actually are survivors or that we live these stories. So your voice is important. Your voice is very important. You are powerful, just like those people. They had no weapons, but they used their voice to stop that one atrocity, at least that one. You heard the man in the movie, in the film, Voices from Darfur, who said, if the world knows, these atrocities might stop. The more we speak up, the more we make these things and bring them to the fore, using our platform, the more we leave no choice to the perpetrators and their sponsors and protectors to actually to stop. Because a voice is one of the most powerful things that a human being has. What does a baby do when they're born? What do they use to do that? The voice, right? What do people do when they need help? They scream, it's like the reaction. So remember, and sometimes, even when danger is coming to you and you scream or yell, danger goes back. So your voice is that important. Do not discount how important your voice is. So, now to the prepared remarks. No, I'm joking. These are Kim's remarks. There's something that he said yesterday. He says, this truth challenges us to act. Knowing about injustice is not enough. That's a really important statement. Knowing about injustice is not enough. It's almost like when something happens and you're like, oh, I learned a lesson. But then you don't apply the lesson is useless. If you learn a lesson and you don't actually put it to work, it's useless. That's called lip service. And he goes, we must use what we know to make a difference. We must turn our frustration into change and replace division with dialogue. As young leaders, you have the energy, creativity, and courage to lead this charge. So, as I said, talk is better than war. And last thing is, always keep in mind, your voice is very important. Please do not waste it. Use it. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll take your questions.